The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the first sound I registered as consciousness slowly returned. The second was my grandson. Gregory's voice drifting in from the hallway just outside my hospital room door. "The real estate market in that neighborhood is peaking right now," he was saying. His voice carrying that smooth, practiced tone he used when discussing business opportunities. We could easily get double the appraised value if we move quickly. "She doesn't need a house that size anymore," came Pamela's clipped response. "My granddaughter always did get straight to the point. This is for her own good. We need to get her into assisted living and sell the house before the market cools." Warren added his voice, betraying that nervous energy he always had when money was involved. The longer we wait, the more complications could arise. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing steady. Years of teaching unruly middle schoolers had perfected my ability to listen while appearing not to. My heart rate quickened slightly, but the monitor's rhythm remained just irregular enough that none of the nursing staff came to check on me. My grandchildren continued their discussion, unaware that I could hear every word as they planned the disposal of my home. The historic house that had been in our family for 4 generations. The house where I had taught piano to hundreds of students. The house that still echoed with the laughter of my children before I lost them. A small smile touched my lips, despite the circumstances. They had no idea what was waiting for them. My name is Evelyn Winters, and at 78 years old, I had just survived a stroke that my grandchildren apparently viewed as their ticket to a substantial inheritance. What they didn't know was that I had already orchestrated my own plans for the legacy they were so eagerly dividing. The house they were discussing was more than just a building with attractive real estate value. It was one of the first homes owned by a Black family in our small Georgia town after the Civil War. My great-grandfather, a former slave who had learned carpentry and saved every penny, purchased the land in 1890 and built the Victorian structure that still stood proud on Magnolia Avenue. The hand-carved banisters, the stained glass transom windows, the heart pine floors, every inch held history that my grandchildren had never bothered to appreciate. I had spent 40 years teaching music in the local public schools, my fingers guiding countless young hands across piano keys, my voice patiently demonstrating proper breathing techniques for chorus students. After retirement, I continued giving lessons in the front parlor of my home, often free of charge to children whose parents couldn't afford them. My husband James passed 12 years ago after 43 years of marriage. Our 2 children, Gregory and Pamela's father William, and Warren's mother Elizabeth, died together in a car accident 15 years before that. The grief nearly destroyed me then, but my grandchildren, just teenagers and young adults at the time, had given me reason to continue. I had tried to fill the void their parents left. I attended every graduation, helped with college tuition, contributed to down payments on first homes, hosted every holiday dinner. I'd sewn Pamela's wedding dress, helped Gregory study for his real estate license, and bailed Warren out of financial trouble more times than I could count. For a while, they seemed appreciative. They called regularly, visited on Sundays, remembered my birthday. But as the years passed and they built their own successful lives, Gregory as a real estate broker in Atlanta, Pamela as a corporate attorney, Warren as an investment manager, the visits became shorter and less frequent. The phone calls dwindled to obligatory holiday greetings. Birthday gifts became impersonal gift cards or flowers ordered online at the last minute. Still, I made excuses for them. They were busy with their careers, their children, their lives. That's what I wanted for them, wasn't it? Success and independence. I told myself not to be a burden, not to expect too much. Layla Washington, my neighbor for 30 years and closest friend, saw through my rationalizations. "Those children only come around when they want something," she observed after they all skipped my 75th birthday celebration 3 years ago. Too busy for their grandmother who helped raise them after their parents died. Who do they think they're fooling? I defended them then, but the truth of her words stung. It stung even more when Gregory called the very next week not to apologize for missing my birthday, but to ask for a loan of $30,000 for a can't-miss investment opportunity. I gave him the money. He never paid it back, nor did he ever mention it again. Then came the Thanksgiving dinner last year, when I overheard them in the kitchen while I was supposedly napping in my recliner. This house must be worth at least $700,000 now, Gregory was saying, maybe more with the historical significance. But the maintenance costs are ridiculous, Pamela replied, and she can't manage those stairs much longer. We should start talking to her about selling and moving somewhere more appropriate for her age. Mom left me her pearl necklace in her letter, Warren added. I called dibs on Grandpa's watch collection, too. I remained silent, then pretending I hadn't heard when I woke up for dinner. But something changed in me that day. The veil of willful ignorance lifted, and I began to see clearly how my grandchildren viewed me, not as a person with her own desires and dignity, but as a caretaker of assets they were waiting to inherit. The final confirmation came when Pamela presented me with power of attorney documents, just in case something happens. And when I found Warren examining the antique silver in the dining room, taking photos of each piece with his phone, I caught Gregory measuring the dimensions of the parlor and making notes about original hardwood floors and historical trim work. They saw dollar signs where I saw memories. They saw a transaction where I saw legacy. The turning point came at my dear friend Henrietta's funeral. As I sat in the church listening to her grandchildren share loving stories about a woman who had clearly been central to their lives, I realized how different my own funeral would be. Would my grandchildren speak with genuine grief, or would they be mentally calculating the proceeds from my estate, even as they delivered practiced eulogies? After the service, I found myself in conversation with Pastor Thomas Wilson. We discussed Henrietta's generosity to the church and community, and he mentioned a music scholarship fund the church was hoping to establish. We need more music in this world, he said, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. Henrietta always said your piano lessons were the highlight of her grandchildren's week. A seed was planted in that moment, watered by subsequent research into the African American Heritage Preservation Foundation. Within a week, I had made an appointment with Marcus Jenkins, a local attorney who had handled James's will years before. I want to donate my house, I told him without preamble when we met in his wood-paneled office, but I have specific conditions. Marcus listened carefully as I outlined my vision. The house would be gifted to a joint venture between the church and the Preservation Foundation to be maintained as a museum, celebrating African American musical contributions, and serving as a community center, offering free music lessons to underprivileged children. Your grandchildren might contest this, he warned. They could claim you're not of sound mind. Then we'll make sure to document that I am, I replied. And Marcus, I want this completed as quickly and quietly as possible. Over the next month, we arranged for psychological evaluations gathered, supporting documentation, and finalized the legal paperwork. By spring, the donation was complete, with the transfer to take effect immediately. The house was no longer mine to sell. It belonged to the community, with a small apartment set aside for my use as long as I lived. I told no one except Layla, who helped me sort through personal belongings, keeping only what had true sentimental value and photographing the rest for the museum's archives. We laughed and cried together as we cataloged each item, each photograph, each sheet of music. Those children are going to be furious, Layla said as we carefully wrapped my late husband's saxophone to be displayed in what would become the jazz room. Especially Gregory. He's had his eye on this property for years. Neck. They'll survive, I replied. They have successful careers and comfortable lives I helped make possible. This house deserves to be more than a quick profit for people who don't appreciate its history. I had just finished recording a video explaining my decision when the stroke hit. One moment I was sitting at my piano, the next, I was crumpled on the floor. Right side numb, speech slurred, consciousness fading, as Layla called 911. Now, 3 days later, I lay in my hospital bed, listening to my grandchildren plan the disposal of assets that were no longer theirs to sell. I had expected this reaction, which is why I had prepared so carefully. What I hadn't anticipated was how soon I would need those preparations. The door to my room swung open, and all three filed in their expressions, arranged in masks of concern that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Grandma, you're awake!" Gregory exclaimed, his voice warming from businesslike to solicitous. In an instant, "We've been so worried. The doctor says you're stable but will need rehabilitation." Pamela said, already efficient and practical. "We've been researching options for you." Warren hung back slightly, looking uncomfortable as he always did in medical settings. "How are you feeling, Grandma?" He asked the question perfunctory. I allowed my voice to be weaker than I felt. "Better today." I said, "Thank you for coming." For the next half hour, they took turns explaining how my life would now change. They had located a lovely assisted living facility 30 miles away. They would handle selling the house, putting the proceeds in a trust for my care. They would distribute my belongings among themselves and my great-grandchildren, donating anything outdated to charity. Not once did they ask what I wanted. Gregory pulled out brochures for the facility, showing photographs of smiling elderly residents engaged in supervised activities. Pamela had already drafted a power of attorney document, which she placed on my bedside table. "For when you're feeling stronger." Warren mentioned that he'd spoken to a buddy who works in antiques about evaluating some of the furniture. I listened, nodding occasionally, conserving my energy for the moment I knew was coming. When they finally ran out of plans and instructions, I spoke. "I need to tell you something about the house," I said, my voice gathering strength. They leaned forward slightly, eager for details that might affect their plans. Perhaps I knew of hidden damage that would impact the sale price or additional historical facts that might increase its value. "I've donated the house to the African American Heritage Preservation Foundation and Community Baptist Church," I continued. "The transfer was completed 2 months ago. It will become a music museum and community arts center named after your grandfather." Silence fell so profound, I could hear the institutional hum of the hospital ventilation system. 3 pairs of eyes widened in nearly identical expressions of shock. Gregory recovered first. "That's not possible," he said, a nervous laugh escaping him. "You can't just give away property of that value. There are tax implications, legal considerations." "All handled by my attorney, Marcus Jenkins," I replied calmly. "Marcus Jenkins." Pamela's voice rose slightly. "Mom's old divorce attorney, Grandma. He's barely qualified for simple wills, let alone complex property transfers. Whatever you signed probably isn't even legal." "It's completely legal," I assured her, "and Marcus brought in a specialist from Atlanta for the transaction." Warren's face had flushed an alarming shade of red. "You gave away our inheritance without even discussing it with us. Grandma, that house has been in the family for generations." "Yes, it has," I agreed, "which is why I ensured it will continue to serve the community as it has throughout my lifetime, rather than being sold to strangers." "We'll contest this," Pamela said, her attorney persona fully engaged. "Now you clearly weren't of sound mind. No court will uphold a donation of this magnitude from an elderly woman who subsequently suffered a stroke." I had anticipated this reaction. With my left hand, I slowly reached for the call button and pressed it once. Within moments, my day nurse appeared. "Could you please ask Dr. Goldstein and the visitors in the waiting room to join us?" I requested, "and bring the envelope from my personal effects." The nurse nodded, familiar with my instructions from earlier. While we waited, my grandchildren exchanged glances, their confidence visibly wavering. Dr. Sarah Goldstein entered first, her silver hair pulled back in a professional bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. Behind her came Pastor Wilson, his kind face solemn and a well-dressed woman I recognized as Catherine Reynolds, the director of the Heritage Foundation. Marcus Jenkins followed, carrying a leather portfolio. Layla entered last, giving me a small encouraging nod. "What is this?" Gregory demanded, rising from his chair. "This," I said, "is the support team I assembled when I made my decision about the house." The nurse handed me an envelope from which I extracted several items: a neuropsychological evaluation, dated 2 months prior, certifying my cognitive function, a DVD labeled Statement of Intent, and a small digital recorder. Dr. Goldstein can confirm that I was of completely sound mind when I made this decision, I explained. The DVD contains my video statement explaining my reasons for the donation, and the recorder contains conversations between the three of you discussing plans to sell my house without my consent, recorded both today and during Thanksgiving last year. Pamela's face had gone pale. As a lawyer, she understood immediately the implications of planning to dispose of a mentally competent adult's property without permission. "You recorded us without consent. That's illegal in Georgia." She tried her voice lacking its usual conviction. "One-party consent is all that's required in this state," Marcus interjected smoothly. "Mrs. Winters was the consenting party. Mr. Jenkins has copies of all the legal documentation." I continued. "Ms. Reynolds can explain the Foundation's plans for preserving the historical and cultural significance of the property, and Pastor Wilson can share how the community music program will provide free lessons to children who couldn't otherwise afford them, just as I've been doing for decades." Warren sank back into his chair, looking deflated. Gregory remained standing, his expression cycling through shock, anger, and calculation, as he tried to find an angle to salvage the situation. "Grandma," he said, softening his tone, "I understand you want to leave a legacy. That's admirable. But surely we could have found a way to honor your wishes while still keeping the property in the family. Perhaps we could donate a portion of the proceeds from the sale. The papers are signed, the transfer is complete, and the Foundation has already begun planning renovations." I interrupted gently. "This isn't a negotiation, Gregory. It's simply information I'm providing as a courtesy." "What about your care?" Pamela asked, shifting tactics. "That facility we found isn't cheap, without the proceeds from the house. I have adequate savings for my needs," I assured her, "and the agreement includes a private apartment in the renovated carriage house at the back of the property where I can live rent-free for the remainder of my life." "You've thought of everything," Warren said bitterly. "I had to," I replied, allowing some of my sadness to show. "When did any of you last visit me without an ulterior motive? When did you last call just to check on me, not to ask for something? When did you last remember my birthday without a reminder from my Facebook page?" None of them answered. The silence stretched uncomfortably until a soft knock at the door announced the arrival of a young woman with a press badge. "You invited the newspaper," Gregory hissed, horrified. "The Foundation did," Catherine Reynolds spoke up. "Mrs. Winters's generous donation is newsworthy, especially given the historical significance of the property. We're announcing the establishment of the James and Evelyn Winters Center for Musical Heritage today." The look of impotent fury on my grandchildren's faces might have satisfied some part of me that wanted retribution for their callousness, but mostly I felt a profound sadness. These three adults, successful by conventional standards, with their expensive clothes and important careers, were my flesh and blood. Yet they had never understood what truly mattered. "You may leave if you don't wish to be part of the interview," I told them quietly, "but I hope you'll stay and support this new chapter for the house you claim to care so much about." Gregory and Pamela walked out without another word. Warren hesitated, conflict evident in his expression, before following his cousins. The newspaper article ran the following Sunday, complete with a photograph of me in my hospital bed, signing the final documents officially establishing the music center. The story emphasized the historical significance of the house, the educational opportunities the center would provide, and quoted me speaking about the importance of preserving cultural heritage for future generations. I received flowers from several former students and congratulatory calls from friends and distant relatives. My grandchildren maintained a chilly silence. Physical rehabilitation was grueling but effective. By the time spring arrived, I was using a cane but otherwise mobile. My speech clear again, though slightly slower than before. I moved into my new apartment in the renovated carriage house, just as the contractors were completing the museum installations in the main house. The grand opening was scheduled for early June, coinciding with the beginning of the church's summer music program. I spent the weeks leading up to it, helping catalog sheet music for the archive, selecting photographs for the historical displays, and recording oral histories about the African American musical tradition in our town. On opening day, I wore my best dress, a royal blue sheath that complemented my silver hair, and sat in a place of honor near the ribbon stretched across the front porch steps. The mayor spoke, as did Pastor Wilson and Catherine Reynolds. Former students of mine performed a musical selection that brought tears to my eyes. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my remarks brief, focusing on the future rather than the past. Music has a unique power to bring people together. I told the gathered crowd, in this house, generations of children learned to play instruments to lift their voices in song to find joy in harmony. That tradition will now continue for generations to come, accessible to all regardless of their means. This is not my legacy alone, but our community's shared inheritance. After cutting the ribbon, I made my way slowly through the house, now transformed with exhibits, interactive displays, and music stations. The parlor where I had taught piano for decades was now the main lesson room, my old Steinway restored to perfection. My husband's saxophone held a place of honor in the jazz exhibit. Family photographs lined the stairway, telling the story of one Black family's journey, from slavery to education to cultural contribution. As the afternoon wound down, I sat in the garden behind the house resting my tired legs and watching children explore the outdoor percussion instruments the foundation had installed. Layla joined me, passing me a cup of lemonade. "Your grandchildren missed a beautiful ceremony," she commented. "I expected that," I replied. "They're still processing their disappointment." "Disappointment, is that what we're calling naked greed these days?" Layla snorted. I smiled despite myself. "They were raised to expect certain things I bear some responsibility for that. You gave them every advantage, every opportunity." Layla countered. "What they chose to become is on them, not you." A small commotion at the garden gate drew our attention. Warren stood there looking uncomfortable but determined, his teenage daughter Zoe beside him. After a moment's hesitation, they approached our bench. "Grandma," Warren began, his voice uncharacteristically humble, "we wanted to see the museum. Zoe has a school project on family history, and well, this seemed like the place to start." I searched his face for signs of an ulterior motive, but found only genuine discomfort and what appeared to be remorse. Zoe stepped forward and hugged me, the first genuine embrace I'd received from a family member in longer than I could remember. "It's beautiful, great-grandma," she said. "Especially the music room. Dad says you used to teach him piano there." "I did," I confirmed, glancing at Warren, though he never had quite enough patience for practice. A ghost of a smile touched Warren's lips. "Some things never change." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Look, Grandma, about everything that happened." I raised a hand to stop him. "Today isn't about apologies or explanations. It's about celebrating what this place has become. If you'd like to be part of that, you're welcome. Both of you." Relief washed over his features. "I'd like that. And maybe I could bring the boys to visit next weekend, if you're feeling up to it." "I'd like that very much," I said, genuinely pleased by this small olive branch. After they left to tour the exhibits, Layla gave me a sidelong glance. "One down, two to go." "Perhaps," I said, not wanting to expect too much. "But even if Gregory and Pamela never come around, I've made peace with my decision." In the months that followed, the music center flourished. Summer programs filled the house with children's laughter, and sometimes discordant practice sessions. The Historical Society organized tours highlighting the architectural features and cultural significance, Church choirs used the space for rehearsals. Warren visited regularly with his children, slowly rebuilding our relationship. Gregory maintained his distance, though I occasionally received stiff formal cards for holidays. Pamela surprised me by sending an email inquiring about family medical history for her daughter, which led to a cautious reconnection. My apartment in the carriage house became a haven, smaller and more manageable than the main house had been, but filled with the treasured possessions that meant the most to me. I started teaching piano again. Just a few students with particular aptitude whom the center's main instructor identified. On quiet evenings, I often sat in the garden listening to music drifting from the house that had sheltered 5 generations of my family. Sometimes I wondered what my grandchildren's lives might have been like if they had understood earlier what I had finally taught them: that a true legacy isn't measured in square footage or real estate values, but in lives touched and traditions preserved. A local reporter interviewed me 6 months after the opening, asking if I had any regrets about giving away a valuable property that could have provided for my family. The greatest assets we have aren't what we keep, I told her, but what we give away. This house has always been a place where music and community intersect. Now it will continue to be that forever. And your grandchildren? She asked. Have they accepted your decision? I smiled, thinking of Warren's growing involvement with the center's programs, of Pamela's recent phone call about attending an upcoming concert, even of Gregory's Christmas card, with its brief but genuine note, "They're learning." I said, sometimes the best way to love your family is to teach them the value of giving rather than taking. That lesson may take time, but it's the most important inheritance I could leave them. That evening, as dusk settled over the garden, I sat on my favorite bench, listening to a young girl practicing Chopin on my old piano, her notes floating through the open windows. The imperfections in her playing only made the moment more precious, a reminder of countless students I had guided through those same passages over decades. This wasn't the ending I had once envisioned for my beloved home, but rather the beginning it deserved: a new movement in a composition that would continue long after my own part had ended. The melody would carry on, changed but recognizable, evolving, but rooted in tradition. My grandchildren had planned to liquidate my life's meaning into mere cash. Instead, I had transformed it into something that would nurture generations of young musicians, preserve an important piece of African American history, and perhaps even teach my own descendants the difference between value and worth. As I closed my eyes and let the music wash over me, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was my true revenge, not depriving them of an inheritance, but providing them and countless others with something far more valuable than money. I had given them legacy, purpose, and perspective. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is not confrontation, but quiet, determined action. My grandchildren had seen an old woman with a valuable asset. They never suspected they were dealing with a maestro conducting her final, most significant composition.